wouldn't be a fun 4th of July without fireworks, but this tradition can trigger painful memories for veterans or any of your loved ones with PTSD. VA doctors and service members have advice you can use to help them and still celebrate. 3 on your side's Alex Love explains what that is.
250 years of freedom and liberty is something to be proud of. But fireworks are seen a little different by Air Force veteran Alton Horton and VA doctors.
Those can be triggers, especially maybe with large crowds, and then with munitions, can kind of bring back unwanted memories.
They're going to hear these sudden, unexpected sounds, and it can be quite triggering for them. So that anxiety around these holidays, particularly with fireworks, tends to go up.
Dr. Gregory Obert is a clinical psychologist at the VA Medical Center in Jackson. He studied how PTSD can make what's fun and patriotic to some send veterans into a panic.
For someone that has experienced combat trauma, that loud boom is going to remind them of all the awful combat scenarios that they were actually in. And of course, that's going to jump them immediately into fight or flight.
So before you light the fuses, communicate with all your neighbors to make sure anyone diagnosed with PTSD knows ahead of time to prepare.
Be mindful, and I always think about the next person. And in this case, especially, myself and other veterans.
Otherwise, those who risk their lives for all of us to enjoy America's 250th birthday will be forced to isolate, and their mental health could get worse.
Even if it's, again, a perceived threat in fireworks. Heart rate going, blood pressure up, temperature up. They're going to be very irritable. Nightmares are going to be more intense, intrusive thoughts of what happened to them.
These symptoms can even lead to suicidal thoughts. Anyone who needs help with that can dial 988 and press 1 if you're a veteran. In Jackson, Alex Love, 3 on your side.